Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Tabernacle Talks. I am your host, Dr. Michelle, and today we're going to be looking at the world of double standards. Same principle being applied in the same situation, but differently, and having a different outcome for people. From issues of ageism to sexism, we live in a world where we rationalize treating people differently. And we see it so much, sometimes we just say, okay, that's just kind of the way it is, without challenging, maybe that's not the way it is. And this system of justification allows some people to excel and others, it just marginalizes them. Take, for example, the gentleman that we may see with gray hair, and we say, oh, he looks distinguished. But we may see a woman who has gray hair and we say she looks old, and we don't see anything wrong with that. Or the male leader who's forceful and assertive, and we say that person has really got it going on. But let a woman try to be assertive in the very same way and see if she's not characterized differently. And I can assure you, most of the titles that she's going to be given are going to be very unflattering because we look at behavior, even between male and female, similar behavior very differently. You know, we were all applauding when Will Smith came out and showed his dad body, you know, and I just wonder how many women would have felt comfortable coming out, showing their body and saying, this is the worst shape I've ever been in, when most women already have issues, and the internet is certainly prone for body shaming. In a complex world, we make very obvious distinctions about people. And we have to ask ourselves, when we're making these assumptions, are we reaching these conclusions based off of old patterns of behavior and old patterns of thinking? Hopefully, you'll be left asking yourself a lot of questions after tonight's segment about maybe the daily biases that we all have and how these impact our society as a whole. I hope you enjoy this segment and leave us comments because we do know that there are double standards, and we all have been guilty of engaging in double standards. So let's try to make some realistic change and just have some insight into our own behavior. Enjoy the show. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal unless you are a woman, old, gay, minority, poor, have a disability, or Muslim. A double standard is defined as a rule or principle which is unfairly applied in different ways to different people or groups. These differences can be seen in all segments of society through the lens of race, gender, socioeconomic status, age, disability status, and perceived power. In the landmark 2004 Kleenex study, it was determined that men and tears still created angst among women. Fast forward 17 years, and societal shifts now conclude that it's okay for men to cry. But of course, there are conditions attached in a pretty funny article still calling to question if we're really ready to see men start bawling. What was funny is that men could cry if in extreme pain, not just the scratch fellas, you know, like a broken arm pain. You can also cry at sporting events if you're winning, certainly not if you're losing. And if you must cry, absolutely never at work and never on social media, because when you do, and you're famous, folks are going to make you into an internet meme. Take, for example, your airness, Michael Jordan. In 2012, during his induction into the NBA Hall of Fame, he cried. I mean, he really cried. And that image became an overnight sensation. And just to show how much of a sensation that image became, in 2016, an app called the Crying Michael Jordan Generator was born. You simply take a selfie or use an existing photo you have, and then you can photobomb Michael Jordan crying right into your photo. This just shows you how far we've come in allowing men to show emotion in public. Now let's go back in history to August of 2005 when Hurricane Katrina, a tropical cyclone that struck the southeastern United States, claimed more than 1,800 lives, causing over $125 billion in property damage. Many of us recall the heart-wrenching video footage of families losing their homes, elderly citizens abandoned in nursing homes, and Black folks being turned away when seeking refuge. There was international attention and media coverage during that time. As the floodwaters raged on and people became desperate, the insidiousness of bias began to emerge from well-respected media outlets. Here we see a young man with a bag and a case of soda wading through chest-deep water. The caption under his photo used the term looting. In this next photo, you see a white couple wading through chest-deep water. The caption under this story talked about them finding bread. Now, in fairness, the same journalist didn't write these captions, but the one who wrote the tagline about the looting tried to defend it until his employer decided they just couldn't and pulled the caption and the photo from their website. Perhaps one of the most polarizing issues we've encountered over the past few years is the American flag. This symbol of American idealism and values has been the center of controversy for years.
Take your flag. Because you don't want to see his face. That ain't got nothing to do with us. My face is here. I'm out here. Just don't say we're the credit. We ain't about that hate shit. We ain't about that hate shit. We stand on two different sides. What's wrong? And nobody burning the flag. What does it represent? My brothers died for the my father died. What does America represent?
There was also additional symbols of protests in the form of kneeling. Across the globe, the practice of kneeling during opening ceremony of sporting events was very prevalent to bring attention to racial inequality and police brutality. The face of this movement was Colin Kaepernick and his teammate Eric Reid. What is less known is that initially Colin was sitting on the bench during the playing of the national anthem. It was his friend Nate Boyer, pictured next to him, who suggested he kneel. Boyer knew the backlash that Kaepernick and Reid would receive would be significant, and it was. Now let's move on to the irony of the bare chest. We all know it's common to see bare-chested men. We can all recall our favorite title fights in wrestling where men routinely come out bare-chested. This practice is normal and accepted. Not so much with women, though. If we had shown a bare-chested woman in this documentary, it would not only have offended people, we would have probably had to put some type of adult rating on this documentary, as most images of breasts are sexualized. In fact, when we were looking for photos on subjects like breast cancer or breast health, we found images where breasts were not actually shown. We found images where women had their backs turned to communicate the message or were holding props that looked like breasts. What's most astonishing is that while all 50 states now allow breastfeeding in private and public locations, only 31 states and the District of Columbia exempt breastfeeding from public indecency laws. So all breasts are not created equal. And if you think you can go topless as a woman, unless you are breastfeeding, don't try it. Not only does this disparity occur in public settings, it also occurs in entertainment. Bare-chested men in movies maintain a G rating, while bare-chested women will earn you a PG-13. Of course, we all remember the Justin Timberlake stunt with Janet Jackson during the Super Bowl halftime show in 2004. After that stunt, the Federal Communication Commission, as a result of public pressure, crafted stronger indecency standards. When you think of one of the worst crimes imaginable, the killing of children rises to the top. According to a 2010 research study, the average number of years of incarceration for the act of filicide was 17 years for mothers. Fathers received significantly harsher sentences. What was most disturbing is that filicide is not uncommon. In the U.S., there are 500 incidents each year, and over 70% of the victims are under the age of 6. Which brings us to a disturbing case of a double standard involving filicide. The world was rocked by the case of Skylar Richardson. high school cheerleader who found herself with an unwanted pregnancy. Desperate and afraid, she tells law enforcement that she delivers a stillborn child and buries the infant in her backyard. She tells no one. Months later, when she visits her doctor for birth control, she makes an admission of miscarriage. The physician informs law enforcement and she is arrested. When the forensic evidence comes back, there's evidence of burns, unexplained skull fracture, and a determination that the infant died as a result of homicidal violence. A CBS investigative report indicated that Skylar later said that the infant made gurgle noises and that she had attempted to cremate the remains. The medical examiner later recants about the evidence of burns, and because there is limited forensic evidence and only the victim's testimony, Ms. Richardson is sentenced to 3 years of probation and 7 days in jail for abuse of a corpse. Skylar Richardson was released from probation 2 months early. She is quoted to have said, "Now she can be a normal person again." China Arnold is a 31-year-old single mother who's reported to have placed her child in the microwave for 2 minutes, resulting in the child's death. There were no witnesses, and there were other children in the home at the time of the incident. DNA evidence from the microwave was recovered at the scene. And after 3 trials, Miss Arnold was sentenced to life in prison without eligibility for parole. She requested a hearing before the Ohio Supreme Court to have her sentence reduced. That request was denied. In both cases, there were no eyewitnesses, only the testimony of each mother. There was reliance on forensic evidence and expert testimony. 2 infants are dead, but only 1 mother is in prison without the eligibility of parole. While there are certainly differences in these cases, there are 2 overwhelming differences: socioeconomic status and race. This is yet another example of the double standard that some lives are worth saving and others are worth throwing away. Now we meet Kevin Strickland, who's been sitting in a Missouri prison for 40 years after being wrongly accused of a triple homicide. There has been a request for the governor to give an immediate pardon versus waiting for the appeal process, which would only add additional time to this miscarriage of justice.
Today we have filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus to the Missouri Supreme Court asking him to overturn his conviction because he is actually innocent. And we are not taking this to court with just our word for it. After review by the Conviction Integrity Unit, and you will hear from later, the Jackson County prosecutor has also determined that Mr. Strickland is innocent. And every official presented with the materials has agreed that his conviction should be overturned. Because of that, I'm here advocating for Mr. Strickland's freedom and that his conviction should be vacated. Most importantly, though, I'm advocating that this man must be freed immediately. My job is to protect the innocent. And often prosecutors show hubris, right? You've probably seen me show some of that from time to time. And today, my job is to apologize. It is important to recognize when the system has made wrongs. And what we did in this case was wrong. So to Mr. Strickland, I am profoundly sorry. I am profoundly sorry for the harm that has come to you. It is not, however, just Mr. Strickland that I owe an apology to. It is to the victims' families in this case, to the victim Larry Ingram and his family, to Sherry Black and her family, to John Walker and his family, and even to Cynthia Douglas and her family. She too was a victim. And I suppose that I could stop there, but harms like this extend beyond criminal defendants and those with the title of victim. It goes to the broader community. And to that end, I want to tell this community that I represent that I find this mistake in this system to be profound, to be one that I should take every ounce of energy I have to correct. I am sorry for this mistake made by this system. There unfortunately is no timeline when these filings happen, right? So the next steps will be up to the Missouri Supreme Court, what those steps are and what they look like.
How often does something, well, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Mr. Strickland is one of the few, I think, that was convicted under this hard 50 rule in Missouri. And so there is a potential for his release, I think, under that hard 50 rule, having served 43 years. So some of that is still in question about, how that time gets compounded. But I think what's clear, Mr. Strickland has made very clear, he seeks full exoneration rather than just release. I think that I certainly owed him that phone call, and I believe how I'd describe it is he gave me a lot of grace in receiving that call from me, from this office. He didn't have to. So I guess that's what I would say. Yeah.
If you have all this overwhelming evidence to say that he's innocent, what is the holdup? Why is he still there?
No, it actually goes back a little bit to the question of, if it's so difficult, why do it? I think there's a lot of things that we can learn, which is also, why is the process so difficult, and does it have to be? One of the things we talk about a lot in our office is a law was passed back in 1996, which was called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which made all these technicalities that kept people out of being able to file. And so now if they file, it's an argument about whether or not they even get to be in court, and not about the issues that they are raising, right? So in the terms of Mr. Strickland, he's filed other things before to say on his own, pro se, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. And the argument is always, well, do you even get to be in court? And not, does this evidence show you're innocent, or is this the right thing to do? So I think that there are things that we can be thinking about, which is how do we change a system to get to the merits, to get to what matters, right? And make it more effective for what we're looking to do.
When you look at the statistics of defendants who are later exonerated because of their innocence, a 2016 examination of the National Registry of Exonerations showed that of the 1,900 defendants in their database who had been cleared of their crimes due to their innocence, 47% of the exonerees were African American, 3 times their rate in the population. According to an MSU law professor, Barbara O'Brien, African American prisoners who were convicted of murder are about 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers and spend longer in prison before exoneration. Sadly, the vast majority of wrongful convictions are never discovered. Let that sink in. On September 17, 1983, Vanessa Williams was crowned Miss America. This was historical because she would be the first African-American woman to achieve this coveted award. 10 months later, Vanessa Williams was forced to resign her title after learning that Penthouse magazine had obtained nude photos and planned to publish them. Remarkably, in 2015, 32 years after being forced to relinquish her crown, the CEO of Miss America pageant publicly apologized to Miss Williams and her mother for the way she had been treated. Fast forward to 2017, nude photos of model Melania Trump also surfaced. By that time, America did not care. America was possibly in a different place, but we know the treatment of both women was indeed indicative of a double standard, and there was always the question, if those photos had been of Michelle Obama, would the world have been equally accepting? Why do we say this? Because when Michelle Obama posed for her formal White House photos, she was criticized because her bare arms were showing. In May of 2020, many protesters, some from the Black Lives Matter organization, gathered at the White House in Washington, D.C. to protest the killing of George Floyd. Their protests were not welcomed and, in fact, were met with a response from American soldiers. It was indeed unprecedented to deploy American soldiers on American soil to fight American citizens. Not only were chemical agents used, but rubber bullets and many reports of excessive force. In January of 2021, the event we see pictured here, called by many the Capitol riot and insurrection, was not met with a similar response. In fact, there had to be repeated calls to determine the best course of action. While the vacillation continued, the Capitol was breached. There are many photos of the Capitol being ransacked, items damaged or stolen, and one Capitol police officer dead. Now let's turn back the clock to 2005. Natalee Holloway was an 18-year-old graduating senior from Alabama, celebrating this life milestone in Aruba. She was seen by friends leaving a bar with a strange man, never to be seen again. The national media attention was heartbreaking and surreal as we watched the gut-wrenching media footage of a family in shock and a nation in horror that such a crime could happen. How could we not be outraged by what was unraveling as a kidnapping, possible murder? Sadly, people disappear, especially black people. Black people make up 13.4% of the population, yet the National Crime Information Center shows that 33.8% of the reports in 2019 were for black people. What is alarming is that when black women disappear, they are not afforded the national media spotlight. Instead, their stories are covered by black journalists and black media outlets. Even though black women make up 7% of the population, they comprise 10% of all missing person cases in the United States. Finally, cases involving African Americans remain open and unresolved 4 times longer than cases involving white and Hispanic people. And when we see couples, it's not uncommon to frequently notice older men with younger women. In fact, it's so commonplace that people rarely comment at all. Of course, there are extremes. We saw in 2011 a 16-year-old actress, Courtney Stodden, married actor George Hutchinson in Las Vegas, Nevada. There was outrage, and eventually the marriage was dissolved, and Hutchinson labeled a pedophile and predator for taking advantage of the young and impressionable actress. What seems to turn heads is older women with younger men. In fact, older women are referred to as cougars when they date younger men. The term cougar actually originated in Vancouver, British Columbia, as a derogatory term for women who hung in bars waiting to take the last man home. It now generally means older women who date younger men. So what's the term for men who pursue younger women? Man-thers. Possibly one of the most controversial and accepted practices of double standards comes to raising our children. There is a common practice we protect our daughters and permit our sons. There has also been polls conducted by the Gallup organization since 1941 that if parents could only have one child, they would prefer that child be male. The research has also found that families whose firstborn child was a girl would continue to try for a male child versus families whose firstborn child was male. What's even more perplexing is that if families showed these gender preferences, then we should not be shocked that gender preferences have permeated other segments of society, pay, CEO appointments, and the like.